Okay, let's see if we have sound. All right, we're ready to go on week 42. I hope and pray that you are as amazing as you can be on this beautiful Saturday morning. Let's go ahead and lower this volume. Okay, so we are here on week 42. Can you believe that? Can you believe that God has helped us do this 42 times in a row, like actually being on here? It is my commitment to do that. And we are so grateful, so very grateful. Okay, now, I don't know if you're like this, but I have trouble focusing on one thing if there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on around me. So, like the music for YouTube videos, I like it when it's all done, but I can't think and listen to music at the same time. It is really distracting for me. So, that means this intro music has to go. It has to go. And there it goes. Okay, so now we are here, and I'm going to put up this screen because, of course, we're going through the Bible chronologically this year, and we're on this week 42. And these are what you see on the screen here is represented, up there is representative of the things that we should have read this week in order to be on track to finish in the 52nd week, which would be the end of the year. But let me go ahead and tell you, life does what it does, and some weeks we just have all this extra time, or we devote extra time, and we get ahead of ourselves. And then there are weeks that stuff goes on and we get behind. But that's why it is just audio videos that you can catch up on, or you could easily go further than what the reading plan is saying that you should be doing. And that's great because everything isn't always static, and we can depend on things changing. And the reason we can depend on things changing and be perfectly okay with that and not lose our peace and not lose our minds is because we know we can depend on God and His Word not changing. And anytime we get overwhelmed, we can lean back and lean on His Word and find our footing and our grounding again. So I wanted to say that to just say, this is one of those weeks where I did in-depth study on one thing and had so many thinkings about things that I actually didn't do the entire soundtrack. I got to a spot and got stuck. Now, that is just one of the things that I do. So, with that in mind, we are going to just proceed because all of it is engagement. All of it is good. And we're just going to use what we have and enjoy it because aren't we satisfied with knowing that God will lead us in the way that we should go and to be doing the things that we should do, especially if we desire for our hearts to be in the right places. And so whatever happens, we can find peace and contentment in that. So this week, the place that I was really thinking on, the way I was really thinking about the word was in Matthew being a bridge. Matthew being a bridge. Okay, so I'm going to go back to, oh, I need to set up my share. And there it goes. Okay, here is the screen share for week 42. Now, you remember when I got this clicker last week? This thing still is not doing what I want it to do. I don't know why. It works if I am just inside of Canva itself, but once I actually, yeah, nothing. I don't know. I really like for that to work. Okay, so it doesn't work. So we need to go on. We've already seen that. Okay, let's talk about the intertestamental period. We all know that that is the period that was between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Some people call it the silent years, because we don't have any Bible in there. But what was happening in those years was the the, the world was rearranging itself to set up the scene for Jesus to arrive, setting up the scene, setting up the culture, setting up the rulers of the world, the conditions that would create the environment for Christ's story to unfold. So with that, we have the intertestamental period. Now, so then we have the opportunity to meet Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. He was one of the ones that was called to be in the discipleship of Jesus, one of the 12. And he represents a bridge between the Old Testament and the New Testament because his audience was mainly Jewish. And so he took a very detailed approach in his writing, and he went all the way back to Abraham to establish the genealogy and kingship, the earthly kingship, as far as being tied to the Davidic lineage. He went all the way back to Abraham to write the genealogy. And that took some very detailed stuff, because this chart that we've been using here this whole time, he would have been the one that helped us go all the way back to all of these folks to be able to get to where we are introduced to Jesus. Now, I know I've been saying I'm going to recreate this chart, and I really am, because I don't really like it just would need to be different to be mine, right? But I've been using it and it's been serving its purpose. So genealogy is the details that we get from Matthew that was good for him and probably really easy for him to do because of his career. And his career would have come with a certain set of skills. Okay. So in order to have been a tax collector, he would have had to have skills like being detail oriented, being good with keeping up with money, being good with precise details, and being able to deal with different kinds of people, maybe being able to be a little rough when he needed to be, if he was assessing a tax and people weren't willing to pay the tax right then. So there was probably, guards around. He was in Capernaum, which was like a trade depot or like a customs border patrol, border control type of place. Uh, and he was there collecting the taxes on probably the annual taxes, any taxes that was travelers needed to pay to the Roman government. And from what I can see, Matthew wasn't like one of the big guys collecting the taxes. He was probably a subcontractor. And these men, wealthy entrepreneurial type men called publicans, were the ones who bidded on the contracts from the Roman government to be able to be the tax collectors. And when they would win the contract, and they would win by paying upfront a certain amount of money to Rome in order to be the ones to be given the right to collect the taxes. And inherently that meant that that in order to make a profit, they would need to cheat people. They would need to collect more taxes than they had paid out to get that contract. And so the career itself carried a bad taste in people's mouths, because because a tax collector was just somebody that nobody really likes. Because here you go doing your work and making a gain for you and your family by your work. And then there's this government that comes along and says, you owe me part of that. Some of that belongs to me. And we don't even get to negotiate or set the rates with how much they get. They just get what they say they're supposed to have. And so this was Matthew's job. Not a very likable career. Now, most likely Matthew was not the wealthy entrepreneur who bidded on the contract. He was probably one of the little guys set to do the grunt work of the big guy. You remember later on in the New Testament, Zacchaeus, it was said that he was a chief tax collector. And that wasn't how Matthew referred to himself in the book of Matthew itself, that he was just a tax collector at his booth, right? And so this is why this picture this week was the one that I came up with, that is kind of trying to show, Matthew at his booth. This really looks kind of like a table, but okay. I told Midjourney to create me a booth, but this is kind of what I got. But the booths themselves, like this guy has a booth over here with his merchant wares, because I did say that I wanted other merchants around. Like this was a hub. This was Capernaum. It was on one of the major trade routes. So there were other people around, not just Jesus and Matthew. So just imagine this scene right here. If this was Jesus, just imagine. And Matthew's sitting at his booth, surely he had collected some money. Okay, so this guy has a bunch of money laying up there. And Jesus goes, follow me. So did he just get up and leave all his money behind? Was it a slow day and he could just put it all in his pocket or his backpack and just carry on with him? If he did that, then maybe that was the money that first funded the ministry, kind of kept everybody going. Like, where did they get money from? How did they eat? Was it just people being nice to them along the way? So maybe when Matthew was called, maybe that was like the beginning treasury, because Matthew has some money. And maybe Jesus was actually the catalyst, just setting up his cabinet so that Matthew would be the one that would be the treasurer because he had that skill set already. So, just thinking about the word and what may have happened. So the other thing for Matthew here is his audience. Okay, the audience. The audience. Matthew is mainly speaking to a Jewish audience. And that would have been very helpful for the Romans because the Romans were speaking Greek mostly. And then there were Jews that spoke Hebrew, but they were acclimated, some of them completely, and the older ones still transitioning from Hebrew into Greek. Alexander the Great did that for the world, like moving that language forward. So Matthew was multilingual. He could speak to the lowest person in their language, and then of course he would have to speak in the highest places in the other language. So he was like a bridge, almost like the way project managers have to be. That because I was in my career, that was my job as software development project manager. So we would have to talk to everybody on the entire project because we were responsible for the entire project, and we would still have to be able to talk to leadership and create reports and just see the whole project in a top down fashion and from a down up fashion. Because if you're not paying attention to what's going on in the entire project, you could have a monkey that breaks the show. You could have a monkey that stops the show, for sure. So Matthew's skills as a tax collector was a good set of things to have for the ministry. He also would have probably, I read somewhere that he was probably good with shorthand, kind of like a court stenographer would have been. And taking shorthand would help him keep up with, very quickly conversations that was being held between peoples, between customers, between the guards, in Jesus' ministry when he was teaching, being able to get those details about the Sermon on the Mount down. And so Matthew being the first book and being one of the first books to circulate around in Judea, in the province of Judea, it was probably the details that he was able to capture because of his skill set that helped people hold on to the belief that Jesus was Messiah, because Matthew was so good at capturing those details. So that is just a way of saying, our lives, even the little things that we do that are just come so natural to us, those are the things that God can use for his kingdom, no matter how big or small it is, because God can use it all for his agenda. Okay, so what else we have here? Okay, now the details and the storytelling. Like this was something interesting that happened like this week. And it made me think about the details that God provides in the Bible for certain things. Now, of course, he couldn't have put details for everything, because then the book would have just been just too much. but I'm always interested in the things that get put in and the things that are just left out. So me and my darling love to sit on the porch, and we're country folk, so we love to sit on the porch and drink our coffee. And one we were out there, and he was telling me the story um, about a neighbor who had bats in the attic, and the way he told the story, I had to kind of make up how the neighbor knew that they had bats in the attic. And so Babe was like saying, they called me, told me they had bats in the attic. And I told them they need to call an exterminator and get the bats out. And that was kind of all he said. We were just talking. And so, but I was left with having to put pieces into the story that he just didn't share. And so in my mind, I said, bats in the attic. How did they know that they had bats in the attic? And how will I know if I have bats in my attic? So the story my mind came up with was, the cartoons you see with the black bats and the yellow background and the eyes. This is like burned in my brain. So that's what I came up with. I was like, oh, there was an encounter of the bats at night, and the glowing eyes, and they saw the bats, and maybe they were swarming all around their heads, and they saw the bats, and then they called immediately and said, hey, I got bats flying all around me. I mean, I just made up this story. I don't know if it was exactly that, but I didn't have anything to go on to for the bat story. Like, how'd you know you had the bats? So I just made something up. And it turned out that when I actually got a chance to talk to my neighbor, they were like, yeah, we had an exterminator that was here doing like the routine thing, and they said, have you checked your attic lately for rodents? And they were like, oh, rodents, attic, because they'd never really been up in the attic. So it was like, oh yeah, I think I do have some space that you would probably call the attic. So they went up there, and the guy came down and said, hey, you got bats. But my husband didn't tell me that part of the story. And so, just like Jesus being the details, just like that, of the details from the doorbell ring. I hope Babe sees whoever it is. Um, just like the details that we get in the stories of the Bible, it helps us put together the story that God wants us to have in a way that God wants us to have it. So the example that came to my mind was God giving us the details of what it looked like in the temple, in the tabernacle, when he was first giving those details. He gave us how it looked, the shape of the cups, the design of the etchings on the cup, the palm flowers, the almond shape of just all of those details, that it was sitting on a table that was this long and that was this wide, and it was in a room that was this big, and it was in a structure that was this long, like all of those details. And so I'm thinking, why was it so important for us to have all of those details? I believe, and this is a story I came up with, God wanted us to know that no matter what it is that concerns us, that He is the God that can give us those kinds of details. That was comforting to me. Because why else would he tell us that? Why is it important to know that there was palm tree shapes on things? You know? The only thing I could think of is that he must want us to know that he is the God of details. When we need a God of details, he can be the God of details. So Matthew gave us enough details to be able to connect the Old Testament story, in which we have to remember that the Jews, it was a family. It was it was a guy who had 12 kids, and they grew throughout all of those years into the Jewish nation. And Matthew was primarily talking to that audience. And they were expecting Messiah. They were expecting the Messiah to come on the scene because, of course, they had the Old Testament. So Matthew was that bridge that helped their belief to say, ooh, we've searched the scriptures. This guy fulfills this thing and this thing and this thing. All of this stuff that we have believed, it's all right here in this man from Galilee. He must be the Son of God. Wow. Doesn't that just, ooh, that just does something to me. That, to have been back there searching the scriptures, knowing that all of these things that I have believed and expected for all this time, it is now here. And my decision is, do I believe it? And that's our decision today. This incredible book that we have that helps us put together evidence for how much God loves us. Do we have enough evidence to have the confidence to believe that Jesus is the Son of God, that he lived, died, and rose again for our salvation? I just love that. So that is where I got stuck on the road I went down this week. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this and bid you a great, great, great weekend. I hope this was fun for you. I hope this was as fun for you as it was for me, because I do love engaging with the word. God bless you.